Hi, I'm Elisa Zhang, and I'm a physician as well as a life and money coach. So, one of the mistakes that I think a lot of doctors make is that they buy their first house straight out of training when they get their first job. And for many of us, we actually don't stay at our first job for all that long. In fact, in ophthalmology, the statistics are that more than 50% of people leave their first job within the first 3 years. And generally, you don't want to buy a house unless you know you're going to be there for the long haul. Now, yes, recently the real estate market has been pretty hot. So if you're in a house for just 2 or 3 years, you could potentially make back your money. But the thing about buying a house is that buying a house is actually quite easy in the sense that all the realtor fees are actually paid by the seller. So your realtor fees and the seller's realtor fees are paid by the seller. So you're only actually paying the closing cost. And a lot of times you can actually get the closing costs covered by the seller. I mean, even in a hot market, if you pay a little bit more for the house, you can potentially get the seller to cover some of the closing costs so that you have less out of pocket. If you use a physician loan, then you're also not putting down a whole lot of money for a down payment. So that makes it a really low barrier to entry to buying a house. The thing is that when you sell the house, now you have to pay your closing cost, which no one's going to cover for you. You're going to pay your realtor's cost and the realtor cost of the person who buys the house. And if you don't have a down payment, you may end up actually bringing money to closing in order to sell the house. And I do know some people who actually have to take out a loan in order to actually sell the house. So that's not a great situation to be in. I know that when you're renting, you feel like you're throwing money out the window, but you're really not. When you're renting, you don't have to worry about any of the maintenance issues. If there's a leak in a roof, it's up to the landlord. It's not your issue. You're not paying the property taxes. You're not paying, a lot of the other, cost of home ownership. And you could potentially rent something that's, so that could be cheaper than what you would buy. I mean, it really does depend on what you're looking for, what's available, what housing market you're in. Sometimes buying a home is cheaper. Your mortgage, insurance, and taxes is cheaper than rent for something comparable. But at the same time, if you end up not staying there long enough, it may still be a wash in the long run. There's kind of a rule of thumb that you want to be staying at a house for 7 or more years before you purchase. That's typically when you can expect to break even on home ownership. If you're putting down 20% down payment, you have a little bit more cushion in the sense that if you do end up selling and the house hasn't appreciated that much, then you wouldn't necessarily have to bring money to closing because of that down payment, but that's still money that you had put down originally. Of course, if you plan on going and buying another house, now you need a down payment for that new house as well. So generally, until you know that you're really going to stay in the area and there's nothing that's going to cause you to leave, then you don't want to actually be buying a house. Now, if you are planning on staying in the area, regardless if that job works out, then you also want to really make sure that your non-compete allows you to stay in the area. There are some states that don't allow non-competes like Massachusetts, but there are other states where non-competes are very enforceable, and you don't want to be caught in a situation where you hate your job and you have to stay there because of the non-compete and because you don't want to relocate because of your spouse's job or your kid's school or your family nearby or whatever reason brought you to that location. Even if you're working for a big hospital system, you want to at least ask and try to get that non-compete down as much as possible. So I did work for a big hospital system, and when I first saw the non-compete, I told them there's no way I can do that because I was coming back to Cleveland, my hometown, specifically come back to Cleveland. And if it didn't work out, I still needed to be able to work in Cleveland. And so I was able to get the non-compete to be much more limited than the original non-compete, that's the general physician contract, such that when I did actually leave that hospital job, I was still able to work in Cleveland and not have to move, though my commute was longer, but I could stay in my same housing without having to actually worry about the non-compete. So you really want to think about not buying when you first take your first job, or if you are going to buy, you want to look at buying it as an actual investment property. So if you were to leave, could you rent it with positive cash flow? If that's the case, then maybe you can go ahead and buy, but really buy in mind that this is an investment. And if you don't stay in that property, that you are going to rent it out and that it will cash flow. That means that the amount that the renter pays will cover not only the mortgage, the taxes and insurance, but also the maintenance cost, and hopefully give you some profit above that. Ideally giving you profit above that. As a real estate investor, I typically look for a 10% cash on cash return. Some people look for 12 or 15%. Some people are happy with 8%, but just remember that it's easy to miscalculate how much expenses are going to be. And so to have a little bit more wiggle room, it's nice to go for that 10%. And so if you end up at 6 or 7%, you're still at positive cash flow. You certainly don't want to be at negative cash flow where you're having to subsidize that property and put out money every month. I hope that was helpful and that information was valuable for you. Of course, maybe you're already past that standpoint and you've already bought that first house. Well, if that's the case, hopefully your job works out. But if it doesn't, you can think about things like, can you rent it? Can it cash flow? And maybe even going back and negotiating your non-compete, if that's a possibility. Everything is negotiable. But if you are a resident or fellow still in training, or you haven't made that first house purchase, that it's really something to think about. You don't want to think about like buying a lot of houses throughout your career, because that will actually not, if you're buying houses for real estate investment purposes, that's different than buying a lot of primary residences. If you're buying a lot of primary residences, I hope it's because you're incorporating that into your investment design. Right. So if you would like to learn more about me, you can always go to my website, growyourwealthymindset.com. If you'd like to work with me, if you'd like to work on building your wealth, or you've made some mistakes like this one where you did buy a primary residence and then you had to sell and you've got a loan because you had to bring money to closing, and you want to figure out ways that you can kind of get out of your current financial position, that is something that I do help people with. You can set up a consultation call with me, totally free. We talk about your situation and whether or not it's a good fit. I'll let you know. If it's not a good fit, I will let you know that. And if there's other programs that would be better for you, I'll tell you about them if I know about them. So no pressure. You can schedule that right at my website, growyourwealthymindset.com. Thank you.